One revelation that I've recently come to derived from a question I've pondered greatly that had been asked to the legendary Joseph Campbell in an interview he'd done, revolved around if we are, in the present, creating myths. And the revelation I've come to is that we ourselves, right here and right now, are living a myth. We are the myth. You may be thinking, how could this be? We are living here and now, so it is clearly not a myth. It's truth, in which I would say to you, nay, the narrative we live is actually, in fact, often so far from the truth. You see, everything that we create is based on our one highly subjective perception, formed from our unimaginably subjective thoughts, opinions, and beliefs, all of which we often embody and project into the world as the ultimate truth. But who's to say we even got it right? Because even when we ourselves are painting our own story, there is no guarantee that we ever get it perfectly right. Thus, based on this premise, nothing can be taken as definitive truth, which quite literally means each and every one of us are creating a story, a myth, every minute of every day that is completely our own unique narrative and gleaned from the narratives created by others that we've chosen to embody. Whilst each and every one of our narratives is unimaginably subjective, biased, based entirely in opinion, and derived from one unimaginably subjective point of view. Think about our motives in life. If one is being honest with themselves, how often do we ever truly know what our deepest motives are? In fact, how often do we really put serious thought to discovering what our deepest motives are? You see, the truth is, we very often don't know what drives us in any given moment. What we have is our opinion of what drives us, which very often derives from very little conscious thought over the matter and is often simply a hasty conclusion we make without a second thought about it. For example, were we just seeking to hook up with that girl because we are an alpha and dominating the ladies is what we do? Or is the deeper truth that we are in fact hollow inside and are seeking a connection, even if it's only momentary, that is missing in our life? Or are we just trying to look cool and be manly in this tough guy world we live in? Whilst most men, of course, most often will paint the picture of the former, that they are just the alpha dog and notches on our belt is what we do, brah. Do you see my point? We are always prone to creating the most favorable reality whilst we try to fit into this popularity contest and this game of triumph we live. So even our own perception of our own story can't definitively be taken as the ultimate truth. In fact, our own stories are very often hugely based in fabricated reality due to this very idea. But even when they're not, even when our truth is damn close to accurate, we still could never definitively know that. We can believe it to our core, but we couldn't definitively know it because we of course aren't, for example, omniscient nor omnipresent. Now, mind you, there may be certain facts mixed into any given story that sometimes we can very assertively say are truth. Like, I invented this gadget, or I wrote this book, or I wrote this song. But is there often not truth buried away within myth? One could even argue that all myths are based in some form or another of truth. But the big picture and the point I am trying to make is that all the lines that connect both the imaginary dots and the real dots are in fact a myth nonetheless. Whilst that myth only deepens as time passes and events slip further from our conscious memory. As our fading memory even starts creating memories to connect those dots in a completely different way than they were actually connected when the event occurred and the memory was fresh in our minds. Take, for example, being bullied. When we've been bullied, we often don't admit we've been bullied to ourselves or others. But why is this? Well, one, to protect ourselves and our sanity by living within a more favorable reality towards harboring our sense of happiness. And two, to avoid the worst among us coming to possess such knowledge who would use such things against us to degrade our social worth. But the fact that we are not admitting to ourselves that we've been bullied says it all, because we are attempting to forge a story, a myth that isn't based in truth, because we are lying to ourselves that we have been bullied. Regardless that our intentions be rooted in protecting our sanity by telling ourselves that we have worth and that we are accepted within this tainted, cruel, judgmental, prejudicial, selfish, duplicitous, and superficial reality we are forced to call our own. Furthermore, take for example when we tell stories about our experiences with our friends. When we tell our stories that we've shared with people we call friends, our perception of those events often lack vital parts of those stories, such as any and all negative aspects of the memory we've blocked from view, coincided things like how those people truly feel about us and act towards us, and thus their clandestinely embodied duplicitous and superficial character that we often deflect and deny, or that we even in fact are unaware of. And the point being, when we are missing or blocking out pieces of the puzzle, when we claim a memory is better than it in fact was to protect our sanity and the lie we live, the story changes and it isn't in fact a truthful nor objective recollection of the event. It is a favorable reality. It is a myth that denies the truth that our social networks are very often incredibly judgmental, prejudicial, intolerant, duplicitous, superficial, and petty. This truth, which drains our soul in a manner those of the light don't want to admit, whilst those of the darkness don't want the light to acknowledge, because their thrones of social dominance are built from the light living with these blindfolds over their eyes. Quite the same. This is why the worst among us, the greatest hypocrites, will deflect and deny anything they do that society might frown upon and thus isn't politically correct, i.e. drinking or texting and driving, doing drugs recreationally, making mistakes like running a stop sign or getting into an accident, or even misusing grammar or spelling, even when they actively and frequently embody what they are denying. Because the worst among us most understand that perception is what they make it. So they control the narrative. They control the story, the myth, whenever they can. Ergo, if you didn't see it, it didn't happen, and it doesn't happen. Period. And despite that not being the truth, it is the truth because they've made it the truth by controlling the narrative, controlling the myth. Now, think about any event in history, an event that we personally have not been blessed to perceive firsthand. Think about how definitively whatever the given event you are imagining is preached from the teachers or movies or books you are thinking of. For example, we are watching a documentary and the narrator says, "This is what happened in Rome under the rule of Julius Caesar, and this is what being a Roman citizen was like." But how does the narrator even truly know that that is what Julius Caesar or what being a Roman was like? Because they are the god of interpreting historical text. Their sole lineage has maintained the history of the ultimate truth for millennia, and or their deductive reasoning is the ultimate deduction? Doubtful. Who's to say the texts they are interpreting are even accurate? Who's to say the texts they are interpreting haven't been misinterpreted for millennia by incredibly biased humans, all seeking for their thoughts, opinions, and beliefs to be the end-all be-all ultimate truth? Who's to say that the given history wasn't written by a conglomerate of elite nobles from a very specific perspective that was in fact highly inaccurate and far from objective? We couldn't fairly say. Do you see what I mean? Even history of the not even far past is incredibly contradictory and unimaginably subjective based on where the information is gleaned from. For example, many teachers preach about Columbus being this great adventurer that founded the New World, yet some now argue that he actually raped and pillaged these poor Native American settlements. Or how some teachers teach about Edison and all the great things he invented, yet some now might argue that he stole much of this work from Tesla. The point is, nobody really knows what happened, because even if the story came from the lips of the individual themselves, there is no guarantee the words are rooted in truth, and there is no guarantee that the words are 100% accurate, even if the speaker was trying to be honest to the best of their ability, because our perceptions are unimaginably subjective. Your core truths are different from my core truths. What has led you to your core truths, your highly subjective experiences experienced from your one unimaginably subjective point of view, is different than what has led me to my core truths. Thus, all we ever have is our opinions. Opinions we often boast as the end-all be-all solution to the given subject matter, even though they are in fact often far from it. Now, ponder this. The truth is, even the sciences, some of which are very often believed as definitive, are subject to change. And any scientist who truly grasps the scientific method will say that nothing is definitive. Everything is simply suggested and either strongly supported or weakly supported, and most importantly, is always subject to change. Because in this myth we live, even something as understood as gravity, for example, could drastically change with the introduction of one infinitesimally small quantum discovery that forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew. Are you starting to see my point? All in all, as far as I'm concerned, the fact of the matter is, we are in fact forging a myth, our myth, every minute of every day. Because much of what we say and preach can hardly ever truly be definitively known as the truth. And this, on that note, is why our candor is of the utmost importance, in which our present lack of candor in this world owned by darkness and by misguided motive is presently our greatest vice as a society, and is the reason our myth is chock full of misinformation. Because we do and say things to be cool and popular in a world that forces us to prove our worth and meet certain criteria within this popularity contest we live in order to have any said worth. And in our seekings to have our worth recognized, we fabricate favorable myths. We make ourselves look like the best person, particularly when we are utterly tainted, disingenuous, and dishonest, in order to prove we have more social worth than our peers. We use our blessed gifts, our wit, our charisma, and our confidence, for example, to project our beliefs, thoughts, and opinions as the ultimate truth, so others worship us and our thrones of social dominance and superiority. Therefore, I find the evidence overwhelmingly supports my hypothesis. And with that, I feel it is most important that, first, we come to understand that we are in fact living a myth. And second, that we must reorient our myth in order to harbor the most accurate myth possible. We must start focusing on our candor above all else. We must redirect our motives away from doing things to be cool and popular in this popularity contest we live. For only when the most lost of us with the worst possible intentions start being honest with themselves and their peers, start redirecting their motives to seek self-discovery, self-betterment, truth, and enlightenment, will our myth start to speak as close to truth as it could possibly get. At least in a reality where truth is being created by the unimaginably subjective and limited perceptions of the primitive life forms called Homo sapiens that perpetually think they are omniscient and omnipresent gods. Though the truth is, until we start reorienting our myth, misinformation will continue to lead us on wild goose chases for truth which likely doesn't even exist. The darkness will continue to control our narrative, and we will continue to fall as a society.